when both of you stop contacting each other. It doesn't land the same way on both nervous systems, and that difference is exactly where you've been misunderstanding the story. Because on their side, especially if they're a dismissive avoidant, the very first wave that hits them is often relief, a feeling of, finally, no more pressure, no more emotional intensity, no more conversations that make me feel like I'm failing. They tell themselves it's peaceful now. They convince themselves that this quiet is what they wanted all along. They lean into that sense of control. See, I can live without them. I'm fine. I knew I didn't need anyone. And in the short term, that actually feels true to them. They go back to their routines, their distractions, their self-focus, and because they're so used to numbing and compartmentalizing, they can genuinely look and seem unbothered in those early days. On your side, though, the silence feels like withdrawal from a substance, because for so long your nervous system has been wired around them, around their messages, their mood, their distance, their inconsistency. Even when it hurt, it gave your brain something to chew on. Your nights were full of reading chats. Your mornings were shaped by whether they replied or not. Your body was used to living in that constant emotional spin. And when all of that stops, what's left is a raw, shaking emptiness that feels unbearable at first. Your chest feels hollow. Your stomach keeps dropping. Your mind wants to reach for your phone 100 times a day. Not because you're weak, but because your system is detoxing from the drug of the connection, even if that drug was hurting you. This is where so many people break no contact, not because they don't know it's better for them, but because the withdrawal is louder than their logic. The avoidance relief is quiet and intellectual. This is easier. Your pain is loud and somatic. I can't breathe like this. And it's easy in that imbalance to tell yourself a very dangerous lie. They don't care at all, and I care too much. But that's not the full picture. What's actually happening is that you are feeling everything now, in real time. While they're avoiding feeling anything until later, they numb first and feel later. You feel first and learn to regulate later. That means your work in this stage is not to obsess over how relieved they might be, but to survive your own withdrawal long enough to discover what's waiting on the other side of it. Because the part you don't see yet is that this shaking, aching, restless phase is where your power is being born, the power you never had while you were still half attached, half negotiating, half hoping they'd magically turn into someone else. Every time you sit on your hands and don't send that, "How are you?" message, every time you stop yourself from stalking their profile or asking mutual friends what they're doing, every time you let a wave of panic roll through your body without acting on it by reaching out, you are rewiring your nervous system. You are teaching it a new truth. I can feel this level of discomfort and not abandon myself to chase someone who has already abandoned me emotionally. And that is not a small thing. That is a complete shift in self-identity. Before, the story was, I can't handle the silence. I have to do something. So you over-explained, over-gave, over-pursued. You tried to regulate their fear, just so you didn't have to sit with your own. Now, as you stay in no contact, the story starts slowly changing to, this hurts, but I'm still here. This aches, but I'm still standing. I miss them, but I'm still breathing. You start to realize that what you were most afraid of has already happened. The distance is here. The loss is real. And you haven't disintegrated. You're hurting, but you're still alive. Meanwhile, the avoidant is enjoying their little pocket of relief. But underneath it, something else is happening. Because their nervous system is also used to you. They're used to your check-ins, your softness, your emotional labor, your presence as a safety net. They counted on your reaching out as proof they were still wanted without them ever needing to risk much. When that pattern stops, their feeling of control is actually being slowly undermined. They told themselves, I'm fine without them. But that sentence was based on the assumption that you would eventually reach out again like you always did. When you don't, their relief begins to feel less like freedom and more like emptiness. But that part takes time to surface. Your withdrawal comes first and fast. Their regret, if it comes, is late and quiet. Which is why this stretch of silence is more sacred for you than it is for them. It's where you finally stop living on their timeline and start healing on yours. The beginning of your power is not when they text you, apologize, or chase you. The beginning of your power is when you realize that the worst part of no contact wasn't losing them. It was facing yourself. Your fear of being alone. Your fear that you were unlovable. Your fear that without this connection you would have nothing. And as you sit with those fears, and they don't destroy you, something fierce starts to grow. The version of you who can feel abandoned and still not abandon herself. The version who can feel the urge to break no contact and still choose not to. The version who learns that relief is coming too. Not the cheap relief of another breadcrumb from them, but the deep relief of a nervous system that finally has the chance to stabilize without being constantly shocked by hot and cold love. That's why the first phase of withdrawal, as brutal as it feels, is the doorway, because once you walk through it and stay with yourself, you don't go back to being the same person who would accept anything just to avoid this silence. The silence becomes the place where you remembered your own strength. As you stay in no contact, something subtle but powerful starts happening inside the dismissive avoidant that you can't see on the surface. Their old story that you will always chase them begins to crack. And that crack is exactly where their sense of control starts to shake. Because for the longest time they've lived with a quiet assumption that no matter how far they pull back, no matter how long they take to respond, no matter how confusing or cold they become, you'll still be there orbiting them, waiting, reaching out, sending the just checking in text. And that belief has been their safety blanket. It allowed them to minimize the risk of losing you in their own mind. It allowed them to treat your love as a constant, not a gift. In the early stage of silence, they lean hard on that story. They're just giving me space. They always come back. Would just need a break. They don't feel urgency because history has taught them that when the tension gets too strong, you'll eventually relieve it. You'll be the one to smooth things over, to explain, to reopen the door. But as the days go by and that message doesn't arrive, that story starts to feel less like truth and more like wishful thinking. And that's when the discomfort begins. At first it's small, almost just a flicker, a random thought at night. Strange, I haven't heard from them. A little check of your profile. A scroll to see if you've posted something that secretly signals you're still emotionally tethered. They might tell themselves they're just curious. But curiosity is just fear with a softer name. Because under it is the growing question: did they actually let go of me? The longer you stay quiet, the more that question starts to eat at the foundation of their ego. Not necessarily because they suddenly realize how badly they behaved, but because the dynamic they depended on has changed without their consent. They've always known, on some level, that they were emotionally distant, but they comforted themselves with the belief that you were the more attached one. The one who needed them more. That belief kept them feeling superior and safe. It allowed them to avoid facing their own fear of abandonment by projecting neediness onto you. But when you don't reach out, don't react to their subtle breadcrumbs, don't fold and break your own silence just to regulate their anxiety, their labels don't work anymore. They can't call you clingy when you're gone. They can't call you too emotional when you're not there to cry. They can't secretly mock your need for reassurance when you've stopped asking them for anything at all. Their mind will fight this at first. They'll double down on old narratives. They're probably mad, they'll come around, they always do. But the days keep stacking up, and your absence becomes less of a mood and more of a reality. and reality has a way of cutting through denial. Your silence becomes a mirror they cannot escape forever, because it reflects back to them the real consequence of their choices, something they've so far managed to avoid by relying on your persistence. And in that mirror they see, maybe for the first time, that you were not staying because you were weak. You were staying because you chose them, and now you are choosing differently. That realization doesn't always crash in as a dramatic moment. Often it seeps in through the cracks of ordinary life. When something good happens, and they instinctively think of telling you, then remember they can't. When something bad happens, and they feel the absence of your comfort, your listening, your soothing presence. When a new person doesn't feel like you, when the attention they get elsewhere doesn't land as deeply, because they once had someone who truly saw them, and they pushed it away. The old story that you were permanent supply collapses under the weight of your consistency with no contact, and underneath it they find a truth that disturbs them. They were never really in control of you. They were only in control of how hurt you were willing to be while still loving them, and once you stopped allowing that, their power over you began to dissolve. And while all of this is happening inside them, your commitment to no contact is doing something equally important inside you. It's slowly detaching your worth from their attention. Every day you don't break the silence. You teach yourself that you are not the chaser anymore, not the one who has to perform, prove, explain, and emotionally drag another adult to the table of intimacy. You stop being the predictable variable in their story and start being the unpredictable one, the one who is capable of leaving the table when the cost becomes too high. That energetic shift is what they feel. Even if they can't name it, they sense that your grip has loosened, that the emotional spell has broken. And that unsettles them far more than any angry text ever could, because losing control over someone they thought would never really walk away forces them to confront a fear they've buried for years. The fear that their own walls don't just keep them safe, they also keep love out, and sometimes they keep it out for good, without the constant noise of the connection. You finally start to see the full pattern clearly, and that is the moment you begin shifting from trying to get them back to choosing to get yourself back. Because when you are in it, when the messages are still coming in, even if inconsistently, when their name is still lighting up your screen, even if unpredictably, your brain is too busy reacting to actually observing. Every little interaction becomes a new data point you use to either give yourself hope or punish yourself. You read into every emoji, every delay, every "sorry I've been busy." You ride the emotional roller coaster in real time and tell yourself that if you just say the right thing, give a little more space, be a little more understanding, you can steer the whole thing back into warmth again. So your energy goes into managing the connection, instead of understanding what the connection is actually doing to you. When the contact stops and stays stopped, that constant feedback loop breaks. And for the first time in a long time, you don't have anything new from them to obsess over, no fresh text to decode, no new silence to justify. And in that stillness, your mind has no choice but to turn toward what has already happened, not what might happen next. And that's where the truth starts to rise. You begin to remember the relationship as a whole, instead of just the highs. You remember how often you were anxious, how frequently you felt confused, how many times you apologized just to keep the peace, how your body would tense every time you saw typing, and then nothing. You noticed that the ratio of pain to joy was not what you kept telling yourself it was, that for every magical moment you replayed 1,000 times, there were countless quiet moments of feeling unseen, unheard, or unchosen that you conveniently blurred out in the name of love. As that pattern comes into focus, something in you shifts from pleading to processing. Instead of asking, "How do I get them back?" you start asking, Why did I stay so long in a dynamic that hurt this much? Instead of thinking, what if they move on and give someone else the love they never gave me? You start confronting, why was I willing to accept so little and call it love? It's not that your feelings for them vanish overnight. Grief still comes in waves, longing still hits you at random times. But the center of gravity moves. They stop being the main character in this story, and you start becoming the subject again. You go from analyzing what their behavior means about you to analyzing what your tolerance for that behavior says about how you feel about yourself. Without the constant incoming noise from them, your inner voice gets louder, the one that whispered all along. This doesn't feel right. You're exhausted. You're shrinking yourself just to keep them comfortable, and you can't drown it out with their occasional, I miss you, anymore, so you start listening. That's when you notice how much you edited yourself to be digestible, how often you swallowed your needs because you were afraid they would pull away, how many boundaries you bent after promising yourself, never again. And instead of blaming them for everything, you take your power back by asking where you abandoned yourself. Because that is the only part you can actually change. This shift is not gentle at first. It can feel like a second heartbreak layered on top of the first. Because now you're not just grieving them. You're grieving the version of you who believed that this was the best she could get. The one who fought so hard to be chosen by someone who never really chose her fully. You might feel shame, anger at yourself, regret, but if you stay with those feelings instead of running back to the familiarity of the connection, they turn into fuel, they turn into standards, they turn into a quiet, firm promise that you will not put yourself back in the position of begging to be seen by someone who is emotionally half present. Slowly, the question on your heart changes shape. It stops being, will they come back? And becomes, even if they do, is that actually what I want anymore? And beneath that, something even deeper emerges. What would it look like to build a life where my nervous system doesn't live in constant panic, where my worth isn't hanging on someone else's unread messages? As you sit in the silence, you start filling it with different things. You reconnect with friends you abandoned while you were busy obsessing. You remember hobbies that used to light you up. You rest in ways you didn't even realize you were depleted. You might cry, journal, rage, but you are finally spending your emotional energy on your own healing instead of on maintaining someone's comfort. And here is the quiet miracle. The more you invest in getting yourself back, your routine, your joy, your self-respect, your voice, the less interested you become in chasing the version of love that required you to abandon all of that. You look back at old messages and instead of thinking, how do I win this person again? You think, how did I keep accepting this? And that is not self-hate, that is awakening. That is you finally looking at the full pattern without the noise, without the fantasy, without the constant hope, interruption created by their sporadic presence, and deciding that your life is too precious to keep repeating a story where you are always the one waiting, explaining, and hurting. Without the noise you see the truth, and once you truly see it, you can't unsee it, and that is the moment your energy starts to turn away from getting them back and towards something far more powerful. Getting yourself back in a way that makes you incapable of ever voluntarily stepping back into that same painful pattern again. Over time, the avoidant often experiences what I call delayed emotional gravity, and that means while you were falling apart in the beginning, feeling the full weight of the loss right away, their feelings drop much later, slowly, almost reluctantly, because at first they float above it all, telling themselves they are fine, that they needed this space, that the relationship was too much, too complicated, too demanding. And in those early weeks they can look almost untouched. They dive into work, distractions, casual interactions, anything that lets them stay in their head instead of in their heart. and from where you're standing that hurts like hell. Because it looks like they've moved on while you're still bleeding. But what you're not seeing is that avoidants don't escape the impact. They just postpone it. They push it down the line until your absence stops feeling like a temporary break and starts feeling like a permanent reality. Emotional gravity begins in small, almost invisible moments. The first time they go through something stressful or exciting and instinctively think of telling you, then have to remember they can't. The first time they scroll their phone at night and notice that the person they used to confide in isn't there anymore. The first time they talk to someone new and realize the level of emotional safety, patience, and understanding you gave them is not easily replicated. Each of those moments is a tiny tug pulling them down from the detached narrative they've tried to live in. Little reminders that what they lost wasn't just a person who liked them. It was an actual connection, a real witness to their inner world. And their mind might still fight that realization at first. But their body, their memories, their quiet moments when nobody is watching, start telling a different story. As your silence continues, as you stop chasing, explaining, and holding all the emotional weight, something else shifts. The old comfort they had, knowing you would always eventually reach out, begins to disappear, and with it goes the illusion of safety they built around your presence. Before, they could soothe their guilt with the idea that even if they pulled away, you'd still be there, even if they messed up. You'd still fight, even if they stayed half in. You'd stay all in, so the risk of losing you never felt fully real. But when you remain in no contact, when you keep choosing yourself, their nervous system loses that backup plan, and slowly, their mind catches up to the truth that your availability is no longer guaranteed. This is where regret begins to grow in earnest. Not in the performative way of, I missed the attention, but in the deeper way of, I pushed away someone who actually showed up for me. That regret doesn't always look dramatic from the outside. Sometimes it's just a heaviness they carry, a discomfort they can't quite explain, a pang in their chest when your name comes up, or when something reminds them of you. They might try to outrun it. Date other people, distract themselves, double down on their independence. But emotional gravity is patient. It keeps pulling, it keeps dropping little scenes into their mind. That one argument where you begged for clarity. That night you stayed up listening to them. The look on your face the last time they dismissed your feelings, and all of it piles up into a quiet, but undeniable awareness that they misused what they had. For some avoidants, this is the point where they start to soften inside, where they begin questioning their own patterns, not just yours. They start wondering why intimacy feels like a threat, why they sabotage when things get close, why they felt safer pushing away someone who was kind than confronting their own terror of being needed. For others, sadly, this gravity may still not be enough to change them. They may feel the loss, but still choose the familiarity of their defenses over the risk of growth. However, whether they change their behavior or not, this phase is real. Your absence carries weight. And it does land, just on a delay. The crucial thing for you to understand is that by the time this emotional gravity hits them, you are not meant to be standing in the same place, waiting to be picked up again. The whole point of your no contact, your withdrawal, your healing, is that while they are slowly waking up to what they lost, you are slowly waking up to what you deserve. So when their regret finally arrives, it doesn't find you in pieces, desperate to be chosen. It finds you in motion, rebuilding your life, reclaiming your peace, raising your standards. And that doesn't mean you have to slam the door if they ever come back. It simply means that their delayed feelings no longer outrank the reality you've created for yourself. Their gravity is theirs to hold. Your job is not to relieve it for them. Your job is to honor the version of you who survived their distance and understand that any future with them would have to be built in a completely different way. with completely different terms. Because once you've lived through the pain of waiting for someone's feelings to finally catch up, you realize you never want to build your life on that delay again. Some may circle back, but by the time they do, the real question is no longer, will they come back? It's, does who they are now actually match the peace and self-respect I've built without them? And that shift is everything. Because in the past, you would have treated their return like a prize, like proof that you were finally enough, like the universe validating that all the pain had a purpose. You would have seen their name pop up on your phone, and your whole body would have gone into shock, heart racing, mind spinning. Already halfway back in the relationship in your head, before you even finished reading the message. But now, after sitting in silence, after surviving the withdrawal, after slowly rebuilding your sense of worth without their attention, their return doesn't automatically mean, this is my chance. It becomes a moment of evaluation, a test not of their love, but of your growth. When they reach out again, they usually don't come back with a perfectly packaged confession. They slide in with, "Hey stranger, I was thinking about you. Remember when?" And the old version of you would have filled in all the emotional depth behind those crumbs. But the you who has sat with your own pain knows that nostalgia is not the same as transformation. Missing you is not the same as being ready for you. Regret is not the same as responsibility. So instead of melting, you pause, you watch, you ask yourself, what are they actually offering this time? Consistent change, or just familiar chaos in a new outfit? You listen not just to the words, but to what your body does when you imagine letting them back in. Does your chest tighten? Does your stomach clench? Does anxiety spike at the thought of going back to that uncertainty? Or does something in you feel genuinely calmer, because their energy is different, their effort is different, their willingness to face hard things is different? By now you've learned that your peace is not a luxury. It's your baseline for any relationship going forward. You remember the nights you stared at your phone, the way your appetite disappeared, the way your personality shrank, because you were constantly managing their moods, and you made a quiet promise to yourself somewhere in that darkness that you would never again make someone else's inconsistency your normal. So when they come back, the question is not, do I still love them? Because of course part of you does. Love doesn't just evaporate. The question is, can I love them and protect myself at the same time? Or would letting them back in require me to go back to abandoning myself? You look at what they've done in the time apart, not just who they say they've become. Have they leaned into their own healing? Have they taken responsibility for their patterns? Have they sought help, learned to communicate, practiced staying instead of vanishing? Or are they simply lonely, triggered by your absence, trying to soothe their discomfort by reaching for the person who always understood them best? You understand now that your self-respect is measured less by how loudly you demand better and more by how quietly you walk away when better isn't truly on the table. Even if the person offering you almost is someone you once would have done anything for. This is where your growth shows, in the questions you ask and the boundaries you don't bend. You might say, I appreciate you reaching out, but I can't go back to what we had. If we're talking again, the dynamic has to look completely different. And then you let their response teach you everything you need to know. If they get defensive, minimize the past, rush to sweep everything under the rug, or try to guilt you for protecting yourself, then you have your answer. They haven't truly met themselves yet, and stepping back into that would be stepping away from all the progress you've made. But if they're able to sit in the discomfort, to say, you're right, I hurt you, I've been facing that, I don't expect you to just trust me, I'm willing to show up differently and prove it over time, then maybe, there is room for a new story, still not a guarantee, but a possibility. The important thing is that you no longer hand out that possibility freely. Just because your heart remembers them, you let your new standards, your restored self-worth, your hard-earned calm have a vote this time, because you've seen what happens when you ignore them. By the time they circle back, you are not the same person they left. Your silence has turned you into someone who knows they can survive without anyone's half-love. And that knowing is what keeps you from automatically saying, yes, just because you waited so long for this moment. The irony is that the version of you they are drawn back to now, the more grounded, self-respecting, peaceful you, is only here because you were willing to lose them. And if taking them back requires that version to die, then the answer is already clear. You don't trade the self you fought to become for the relationship that only showed up once you finally learned how to live without it.